Many describe it as the first test for France's new president. Turnout may have been light by French standards, but trade unions say it's only the first of many protests against Emmanuel Macron's labor reform. Elected back in May on a reformist ticket, Macron had so far enjoyed a bit of a honeymoon period, made easier by a splintered opposition, both on the left and the right. First to define, the communist-aligned CGT Trade Union Confederation. We're going to be asking about Macron's plan, the cap on severance pay, the review of collective bargaining, and whether this is the right medicine to get France back to work, a nation with double the unemployment rate of Britain or Germany. Speaking of Germany, as they get set to vote there in 12 days' time in a general election, we'll be asking which system, a decade after big reforms across the Rhine, best defends the interests of the workforce of tomorrow. This is automation and the demand for changing skill sets head us into an age of major upheaval. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Macron's first strike. With us, he was out on the streets today, Antoine Léaumont, head of digital communications for the leader of the Unbowed France party of the left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. You also have your own YouTube channel.
Yes.
Called Common Sense.
Common Sense, le bon sens in
Le bon
French.
sens, right. With us as well is, we want to welcome Patrick Thiebart, partner at the law firm WENTE Associates.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, François.
I want to welcome back as well Pierre Abad, acting general secretary of the Trade Union Advisory Committee to the Paris-based Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD.
Absolutely. My pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being with us. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. 180 protest marches across France, 60,000 marchers in Paris, according to the unions, 24,000 if you believe the Interior Ministry. Thomas Waterhouse has more.
Their balloons and flags have long been waved on the streets of France in protest, and this Tuesday is no different. From Marseille to Paris, rail workers, students, civil servants and a host of other CGT members are out in force once again. With links to the Communist Party, France's hardline and oldest union has called on workers to down tools in anger at government plans to reform the labour code. Their charismatic leader has already blasted Macron's proposals as being a declaration of war.
We demand collective bargaining rights, salary norms. Call it backwards, to use the president's words, but that's what's at stake. This law is worse than the one last year, which we succeeded in slowing down.
The 36 different measures under 5 different decrees aimed at overhauling France's draconian labour code were unveiled by the government last month, adding fuel to the flames of the CGT's discontent. They call the blueprints a social coup d'etat that would give full powers to employers, adding that the text spells the end of the work contract with fears that it will corrode job security. Martinez also qualifies the reform as just old recipes that won't change the lot of the people. Macron, though, has already told business leaders that he's fully determined and that he won't cede any ground. The CGT is being supported this Tuesday by a string of other workers and student groups. But Martinez regrets the fact that larger unions that have criticised Macron's blueprint in the past have chosen not to sing from his hymn sheet. Despite those divisions, the CGT has vowed to keep piling the pressure on the government until the proposals are scrapped. Fresh protests are already in their diary for September the 21st.
Yeah, September the 21st for the CGT. 2 days later for your party.
Yeah, it's not party, it's a movement.
Oh, it's a movement, okay.
Yeah.
The people watching this story outside of France, they had heard predictions that the country would grind to a halt this Tuesday. That didn't happen. Turnout light by French standards.
Yes, actually, there was quite a lot of people in Paris. I was in Paris, so that's what I saw. There was really a lot of people, and they were really having good words, using humor, sense of humor, to make fun of the hard words that Macron used against the French people, and words that he used abroad. in Greece.
Yeah, he
And
called them slackers. We'll hear what he
Yes,
had to say a little
yes.
bit later on.
Yes, and so a lot of people were using this word, saying slackers are in the streets. Macron, you're gonna be down. And so, really, this was a demonstration with a lot of people, and there was really volunteer to make Macron go back on this bill.
All right, strong will, strong resolve among those who were there. When you look at the turnout, Patrick Thiebart, what's your first conclusion?
Well, first of all, it's employees' right to protest and to be in the streets. So I think there is no issue on this. The second thing is, in my view, there is no surprise. It seems to me that Macron, when he was a candidate, clearly announced that he would change the labor code. And actually, what I've seen in the labor code is more or less in line with what we could expect. The other thing I would like to say is...
Just important on that point,
Yes.
which is his predecessor, François Hollande, ran on a left-wing ticket and then proposed a labor reform which was a watered-down version of this.
You're right, François.
And people felt betrayed when he did that because it wasn't what he said on the campaign.
You're right. And the thing is, first of all, I think it was in line with what is said when he was a candidate. The second thing is, this is the very first major reform. And I'm very happy that we started by the labor code, because I do believe that the labor code needs to be reformed, for sure. The other thing I would like to say, François, is we had roughly 100 discussions between the French government and the unions, 100 negotiations during the month of August mostly. So we cannot say that this reform...
You don't think it's being rushed through?
Exactly. So I think it's another point, and it probably makes also a difference with the method of President Hollande. So I think it's important also to notice this.
All right. Before I turn to you, Pierre Abart, and ask you what you think of the general mood as we head towards the second demonstration in a little over a week's time, let's take a look at what exactly President Macron is proposing. Laurent Berstecker has the story.
Emmanuel Macron was elected on a promise to overhaul France's restrictive labor code. And while critics say the latest reforms give too much power to employers, the French president sees them as a crucial step to revive the country's struggling economy and make it more attractive to foreign investors. Under the new laws, small companies would be able to directly negotiate working conditions with employees rather than being subjected to industry-wide agreements. Compensation for unfair dismissals would also be capped, and it would be easier for foreign companies to fire staff on economic grounds, even if they're turning a profit abroad. The reforms also seek to offer alternatives to the CDI, the job-for-life contract most commonly used in France. Instead, they want to expand and encourage the use of short-term and project-based contracts. Emmanuel Macron hopes the business-friendly measures can help tackle unemployment and make France's labor market more flexible. But the president's flagship reforms are already facing fierce resistance from workers and labor unions.
How fierce does it seem to you, the resistance?
Well, today's demonstration is a test. It's a test for the government. The key message that we should bring back tonight is that the French labor movement believe, you ask the question, is it the right medicine that we need for France, for workers, and for inclusive growth, for long-term growth? Tonight what we can say is that the labor movement believe that it's not the right medicine. There are some divergence of opinion among union centers. France has a very diverse labor movement, very vibrant, and that's a good thing. There's diversity, but they're all the French centrals, those who were in the streets.
The big confederations.
The big confederations, those who were in the street and those who were not, they all agree on one thing. This is not the direction that we need to take for the future.
Okay, but let's now go into specifics then. The idea that it should be a little easier to fire because that way it'll be easier to hire.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a classic argument. For employers, easy firing, create jobs. The fact of the matter is that there are enough studies from the OECD that show that there is no evidence at all that allowing for easy firing create job. Secondly,
The cap on severance pay.
cap on severance pays. In general, this package is about, the direction is reducing employment protection legislation, employment protection for workers, both individual and collective. And secondly, it's about decentralization of collective bargaining, moving from law-based rules to collective bargaining
At a company level.
and down to company level. One point, because it was mentioned in the report there, is that we are told that France has a very restrictive labor code.
Yeah, and there's lots of temp workers, right?
know.
It's one of the highest. When you look at Europe, they have a huge amount of temp workers because employers don't want to give that full-time contract.
François, let's look at the evidence. The OECD and the OECD, which is no friend of the labor movement, has an established indicator called the employment protection legislation that ranks countries according to the level of restrictiveness or protection of workers. Well, guess what? It happened that France has actually a level of protection of workers, individual, collective, that is actually lower than Germany, which is, we are told, the way forward. And it actually has a protection level which is very close to Denmark, a country that is heralded for flexicurity. So we are not, this argument according to which France has an over-rigid regulation, we don't buy it. We just look at the evidence from international organization, we don't buy it.
Patrick Thiebart?
It's nevertheless very obvious that the French labor code was very unflexible. And I'm a practitioner, I'm an employment lawyer, and so I work on this on a daily basis, and I can tell you that the labor code is full of traps for employers. The thing I would like to say, François, is first of all, yes, there is a simplification regarding the firing process, for sure. But let's be clear as well. When you fire an employee, you still need to have a good and valid reason. There is not any at-will doctrine in France. You cannot fire people as you want. And this will remain under the strict scrutiny of the labor courts. So we cannot say that this is a purely liberalism code where employers can do what they want. I think it's very important to say that. Regarding the cap, of course, damages will be capped, damages awarded by the labor courts. But at the end of the day, isn't it the same thing in most of the European countries? The answer is yes. Look at what happens in the UK, in Germany, in most of the EU countries, you have a cap. And last but not least, the French Constitutional Council just said on the 7th of September that there was no problem at all. And Les Insoumis, the Communist Party, Socialist Party, have been, at the end of the day, they lost the case before the Constitutional Court. I think it's important to remind that.
There is something to say, because when you're speaking about unfair dismissal, the problem is that this is unfair. You're not respecting the law. So saying that you will cap this compensations is saying to the employers that you can evaluate what will cost to fire someone without respecting the law. So this is saying to people, you can do what you want with the law, and you will be able to know how much it will cost to you before you do what is unfair and forbidden. And there is something else, because you said a few minutes ago that Emmanuel Macron was elected on the base of a liberal program. This is true and false. This is true because he said he had a liberal program. He said a few things about what he
promised on the campaign.
What he wanted to do. He didn't go to that sort of details that we are into today, and he didn't say he would do it by I don't know the word in English, but that sort of
ordinances,
law.
Which are sort of like decrees, but not quite.
Yes,
yeah.
And so he didn't say that, and actually. Yes, he was elected, but the election in France was really specific because 41% of the people who voted for Macron did that without voting for his program, saying they voted for him because there was no alternative for them. And on the second turn, he was in front of Marine Le Pen. And
in the second round, yeah.
In the second round.
Against the National Front.
Yes, and definitely the vote at the second round was against Marine Le Pen and not for the program of Emmanuel Macron. So now in France, you have Emmanuel Macron cannot say he was elected for his program and he was elected to do that, because actually what is the situation is that there is more people who voted for the program of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. If you watch at the polls, there was more people who voted for the program of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, because there was 85% of the people who voted for Jean-Luc Mélenchon who did it for his program, which means 6 million people. And for Emmanuel Macron, you had only 58 percent, and so this is only.
All right, so
5 million
Mélenchon
people.
finished fourth in the first round of the
Yes, but
presidential
there was
election.
more people who voted for his program.
Let me ask you, Patrick Thiébar, how much of a mandate does Macron have to change the labor code?
I will say it should be done immediately. He cannot. He should definitely not repeat the mistake which has been made by François Hollande, i.e., having this loi travail at the very end of his mandate. So he said
He's
that
going fast, as you said,
He
very
goes-
fast with the negotiations.
he goes fast,
track
but-
ordinances to implement the law.
But this is definitely a very important question, because we do need to attract more investment. We do need to decrease the very high unemployment rate that we currently have. So it is very important to do so, for sure, especially with the Brexit time.
It's quite amazing, if I may.
Very briefly.
No, there's a major trust in government, in globalization. If a lot of people are voting for populist parties, right-wing populist party, including people from the fading working class, from the fading middle class, it's because precisely that kind of recipe, flexibility, decentralization, is an old recipe that we've tried in the UK and in many other countries, and it does not work. It's not that way that you will create good jobs. It's not that way that you will create confidence.
All right, so how to create jobs is the question that we'll be putting to our panel. When we come back, stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. Bit of a baptism of fire for France's president. His first strike since he was elected back in May. This against Emmanuel Macron's labor reform plan we're talking about in the company of Antoine Léaumont. He was out in the streets today. He is the digital communications director for Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the head of the party of the, the Unbowed France.
Unbowed France, which is a movement.
Which is the far left leader. Also with us is Patrick Thiébar, a partner at the law firm Jeantet Associates, and Pierre Habart, acting General Secretary of the Trade Union Advisory Committee to the OECD. What does the Trade Union Advisory Committee do? Just remind us.
We represent organized labor, 56 national trade union confederations from OECD-based countries, American unions, the French unions, French trade unions, as well as Japanese with the OECD. The OECD is a think tank that whispers at the ears of governments, and it gives them ideas on how to implement reforms across the entire economic, social, environment spectrum.
Now, we were talking about the French president and how he's faring up when it comes to this labor reform bill. He's far from the maddening crowd in Paris this Tuesday. Emmanuel Macron touring overseas Caribbean dependencies battered by Hurricane Irma. Elsewhere, though, critics unearthing remarks he made on labor last week before the French community in Athens. There, the young president used the S word. Slackers.
I am very determined, and I will not give in to anyone. Not to slackers, not to cynics, and not to hardliners. And I ask you to show the same determination as me.
So, Patrick Thiébar, I'm going to ask you a politics question here. The use of the word slackers, what was your reaction?
I don't like this word, obviously. Like I don't like the word coup d'état social, which in my view is just too much. It seems to me that all of these are just posture, as we say in French. It's
Posturing.
just exactly. But definitely, at the end of the day, we need to go ahead. We need to sign agreements in the companies because companies need flexibility. So at the end of the day, that is the most important thing to me.
All right, you heard Antoine was mentioning how in the demonstrations that word slackers was picked up on by the marchers.
Unsurprisingly, this is not, there is no reason to use this kind of words. Again, people are completely used to protest. It doesn't make sense to say this.
Pierre Rabart, how's Emmanuel Macron doing?
He's a young president who, I guess, is taken by the exuberance of his position. But he is repeating the same mistakes than previous governments. And I guess he's taken by this, as we say in French, pensée unique, on how to design group thinking. Voilà, correct my English. On how to design growth that works for the people. It is again the same recipe: flexibility, decentralization, individualization of right, of risk, and that's not the right way to do.
Are you saying there's groupthink? Who engineers that groupthink? Is it politicians? Is it the high civil service? Who is it?
Well, for sure, it is a mix of stakeholders. What matters is we were speaking about democracy. Democracy is not only about voting; it's about voting on a day. It's also about having vibrant civil society and a vibrant labor movement that can come up with some good proposals and to show alternatives to frankly, a formatted model that goes about flexibility and individualization of risk.
Antoine Léaumont, you heard Patrick Thiebart saying that the word slackers is the wrong one. Do you take his point that talking about a social coup d'etat, as the leader of your movement has mentioned, that also is perhaps too heated a rhetoric?
No, of course, I won't. But this word was used to show how much the politics of Emmanuel Macron is going into one direction, which is taking to the poor and giving to the riches. If you take, for example,
but that's your point of view, and you're entitled to it. But it's not a coup d'état, is it?
When we say a social coup d'état, it is to show the fact that he's using ordinances, which is a system in France that allows the government to
fast track.
Yes, to fast track, but to write the bills himself, which is then you have a vote in the parliament. But the point is he wants to go fast and to decide by himself. But there is something else. The politics of Emmanuel Macron is going into one direction. That's what I said just previously. Is when I say he is taking to the poor, for example, with the housing helps, the housing subsidies, he's taking €5 per month to the poorest people in France. And then what he's doing...
No, he's suggesting it. He hasn't made a law at this particular point in time.
Sorry?
He's suggesting it to this
it will be implemented the 1st of October. So this is, for example, this is a decision that was not in his program. And at the same time, he's going to suppress a part of the taxes on the people who are the wealthiest in France. So this will cost to the people about 7 billion of euros.
There's just perhaps one contradiction with the current government is that we are told on one hand that France wants to take action to avoid social dumping and to revise a EU directive on posted workers, travailleurs détachés. We had the president touring around. This proposal of reform, by moving from sector-wide agreement to company-level agreements, potentially will open the gates for more social dumping. It will allow firms to develop complex schemes whereby they potentially will be able to make more use, not less use, of temporary workers coming from a low-paid country. So there is an apparent contradiction. If the French government wants to work, and we believe and we support that against unfair social dumping, it should support sector-wide agreements, not company-level agreement. It should support a level playing field for all workers, and not a case-by-case system.
Patrick Thiebart?
Yeah, I would like to say one thing. Do you know how many company-wide agreements have been signed in 2016? 42,000 agreements in the companies. Do you know how many agreements had been signed in 2015? 36,000. So, and do you know that the unions, including CGT, signed between 80 to 90% of the agreement? So I was talking about posturing, François, with the words that coup d'etat and this kind of thing. But I'm telling you that in the companies, the unions, including CGT, are signing many agreements, many of them.
For one reason, which
depending on what the content of the agreement.
Yes,
whether it's about basic rights, whether it's about pay and organization, or whether it is additional rights. The issue is not to prevent social dialogue at firm level. The question is whether we have level playing field, also for SMEs, because we are told that SMEs are going to benefit. What will happen is that we will have like mini local agreements that only cover 10 workers. I'll spare you the transaction cost because you will know that to negotiate an agreement, it's very time consuming for workers, for unions and employers. But it will actually, it won't play against SMEs because they will have less bargaining power with the big firms. You have to realize that in France, in many countries, SMEs, the main threats are not necessarily regulation, it's the big firms. They've been squeezed by the donneur d'ordre, the ordering party. And so with sector-wide agreement, it's a level playing field for all.
And there is a reason why the trade unions are signing agreements. This is nowadays in France, before the Macron's law will be going on. When you sign an agreement, it have to be better than the law. So if you sign an agreement, this will improve the situation of workers. So the trade unions have many reasons to sign those agreements because they improve the situation of workers. Now this will be different. Now the agreements signed can be less protective
than the collective bargaining agreement that's
Yes.
That brings us to the comparison with Germany. You mentioned small and medium-sized businesses, the SMEs. We're talking about company, how should we say it, a corporate culture where unions and management are not always at each other's throats. For that, the French always look with envy at Germany. Across the Rhine, the Germans, by the way, voting in a general election September the 24th, Angela Merkel has stolen, well, some of the Social Democrats' thunder by addressing some of their demands during the current mandate, most notably the reinstatement of the minimum wage. We have been hit time and again with this example of Germany where they did this labor reform. It was tough. And now their economy has unemployment, which is half the level that it is in France.
Yeah, but they also have 6 million precarious jobs. And they have a wage-compressed model of growth that is not working. The OECD came up with recent figures, and they came up with a very surprising figure. Unemployment is falling, it's decreasing, in Europe, but there is no uptake in wage. And that's for basic economics, that's quite surprising. And the reason why, because the jobs that are creating today are in mini jobs, precarious jobs that are not protected by collective sector-wide agreements. So that's why
Credit Suisse put out a study recently saying that wage growth was on the uptick in Germany, and in fact, it's exceeding that of France, it's exceeding that of Spain and Italy.
Yes.
After 10 years of top-heavy compression. So hopefully, there is an uptake. But after 10 years where Germany has been on a perhaps unsustainable export credit, the most important from now is to consider that employment protection legislation, social dialogue, is not the enemy of growth. And that's, unfortunately, that's a reading that you can have of what the current government in France is proposing.
All right, Patrick Thiebart, you've been in many a labor negotiation. This very French culture of defiance, when you're always at loggerheads between management and the unions, is that going to change?
It must change, François.
It must, but will it?
It will, because first of all, as I told you, in the real life, we had in 2016 42,000 agreements negotiated in the companies. The other thing I would like to say is there is no gun on the unions to sign agreements. If an agreement is not signed, you go back to the law. Let's be clear. You go back to the law. There is no way for an employer to impose his view. It's just impossible. The only thing we saw, was a possibility for the employer to take the initiative to make a referendum if he signs an agreement with a union which is a minority union, 30% of the votes. I know that les Insoumis, the Communist Party, said this is not fair, this is impossible. The French Constitutional Council, le Conseil constitutionnel, said there is no problem with this. So at the end of the day, I think that we are really making, with this ordonnance, very bad thing, says this will kill employees and unions, and let's give a chance to this ordonnance.
And to Pierre Habart's point that this won't be as good for small and medium-sized businesses, SMEs, as the government claims?
It's of course really good for small businesses because they have now the right to sign agreements. Was it really fair that a company with only 10 people could not sign an agreement with the employees? Nowadays, they will have the possibility. You know how it will work? They will make a referendum. If at the end of the day, the majority of the employees says, no, I'm sorry, I disagree, I will not sign, there will be no agreement. It's as simple as that.
You asked, your first question, François, is what is the right medicine for France and I guess for the Eurozone in general? What is the main barrier to hiring people, okay, according to survey? When you ask employers only, by the way. A recent survey, just as there was released just 2 months ago, showed that the main reason is the bad economic outlook. Okay, that's the main reason for not hiring. The second reason, the lack of skills of workers. Okay, and way behind afterwards, you had indeed employment protection,
training the workforce,
economic outlook, create demand, create a perspective for the employer. I mean that I will hire if indeed I can sell my product. I will invest in people. I will invest in technology if there is a perspective outlook.
Because earlier we went on the government on the website of the government of Denmark. Because there's been a lot of talk about Denmark in the past week here in France. On its website, it devotes an entire page touting the concept of, let's see if I pronounce this correctly, flexicurity. It's a concept of labor relations where they talk about a triangle where you have flexibility but job security, and they say that they devote 1.5% of GDP to trying to retrain.
Yeah, the hidden story with the Danish, because that's a well-known example. The idea is to protect workers, not protect the job. It's shown that you need actually to protect the both precisely to allow workers to access more skills, to access more training.
But the idea is that you can have a higher turnover so you can change jobs, which we're in an economy now where the jobs are changing fast.
It works with a unionization rate of 80% or between 60 and 80%. It works in a country where unions are accepted by employers as a valid partner, where there is constructive dialogue between the two parties. In France, again, looking at the survey, the main reason for workers not to unionize is la trouille, the threat of reprisal from management. So it is a system that works in a small country, an export-oriented country, where you have 60 up to 70% of workers who are unionized.
The low level of membership in France, is it because of fear?
It's lack of trust. Lack of trust in the unions. Let's be clear. Talk to the employees. They will say, I'm sorry, I don't trust them anymore. That's most of what the employees have in mind. This is exactly the reality. So actually, I'm not against the unions. I'm not against. What the French Constitutional Council said, unions do not have the monopoly of negotiations with employers. This is not me who said that. This is le Conseil constitutionnel. So you should accept that the social dialogue should be with the unions, and again, I'm not against the unions, but also with employees' reps and with employees themselves directly. There is no problem.
If I may,
just 1 second. There is a problem with the flexicurity and with what Macron is doing in France. Is that you see flexi, but you cannot see security. For example, one structure will disappear with this law, which is the Committee of Health and Security. There are you have to have those
the health and safety board inside of each
you have to have them in more than 50 employees company, and now they will disappear and you will not have to have them. Those committees were specialists of security and health of the employees. Nowadays in France you have 565 people dying each year at their job. Would you say this is securizing for people that this sort of committee will disappear? No, it's not. And there will be more people dying at work because of this law. We know it from now. And this is not a question of dialogue or a question of economy. This is a question of people dying at work. But
getting rid of health and safety boards.
Can I say something more, because I didn't speak a lot. I didn't speak a lot during the show. So there is another problem, which is now in France we have a problem of demand. We do not have really a problem of offer, which was what you were saying. When you say to people you will have contracts that are short-term contract, you cannot. Those people cannot go to the bank and ask for money to buy a house. When you, for example, or a car or something else, and this is tackling economy, because people cannot spend money into the economy because they are not stable in their life. So one thing to improve the economy is to stabilize people in their work, I think.
All right. The idea of how much security you have in your job, of course, still the argument. And after the labor reform, President Macron has vowed to tackle pension reform. He's even talked of taking on that sacred cow, the retirement age of train drivers, currently between 50 and 52 years of age. No surprise to find in the crowd at Tuesday's demonstration employees of the National Rail Company, the SNCF.
We're going to strike. We'll strike and take to the streets until our demand is met, which is the safeguarding of our special rights. Generation after generation of rail workers fought hard to get them, and now we have almost nothing. And it's out of the question, under the pretext that we should be treated the same as other employees, that we will lose everything, given that we already have practically no advantage over other workers.
Pierre Abad, you understand that for a majority of public opinion, the idea that train drivers can retire at age 52 seems very low.
People understand that pension is part of a broader package. Pension is a deferred wage. I choose, if I can, a job, and you make a rational choice between the job, the remuneration you get during the working period, and the pension package that you have after retirement. Perhaps in France there are indeed there's a very diverse pension landscape. There are many pension schemes. And there may be it may be time perhaps to review the system. The question is not whether you have 10, 15 or one scheme. The question is what is the bargain? How do you distribute the pension risk between the workers, the employers, and the states? Let me just remind you that if in France we have a poverty rate that is half the OECD average, is among others because we have a system that protects all the workers. And that system, you don't have it in the US, you don't have it in the UK. So it's fine it's one thing to point at one particular scheme, you have to look at the entire system.
All right, and the argument's only just beginning when it comes to labor reform. I want to thank you, Pierre Abad. I want to thank as well Antoine Léaumont, Patrick Thiebart. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. So just to take a look at how this story is playing out online, you have headlines starting with our own website first. Macron faces first major street protests of his presidency. So there is a lot of interest in how this is going to play out and how it's going to affect his tumbling, popularity ratings. You've had the local France, for example, live blogging or live tweeting, as many other media have been, the scenes on the streets of Paris and elsewhere. Chants of Macron, Macron, president of the rich. president of the bosses. So that's one of the chants that has been relayed by journalists following it on the streets. You've also had the famous slogan, Je suis feignant, I'm lazy.
I'm a slacker.
I'm a slacker. That one, clearly no regrets on the side of the Élysée Palace in terms of that choice of words. It was probably very carefully chosen, and the choice of a very symbolic word. That is the headline in one article on BFM.
Oh, so this was calculated, is what the article.
It seems to be the case, and another article in Le Monde picking up on that as well, saying that he completely owns the choice of this word. Of course, while many people first of all assumed that it was applied to the protesters themselves or those who were disagreeing with it on the streets, it's being spun now to basically appear to have been targeting political opponents. So whether or not that's calculated as well is difficult to say. Elsewhere, you have fairground employees. I suppose that's a kind of a strange one for people viewing it from abroad. Why they would have such a prominent position in the protest is difficult to figure out, except when you see, I suppose, the vehicles that they drive and the fact that they were able to completely paralyse Place de l'Étoile around the Arc de Triomphe with their very large vehicles. That's probably the only reason why they were given such prominence. So images such as that very prominent in today's coverage of the protests. And also some more difficult scenes with riot police clashing with Antifa or anti-fascist protesters in Paris
Seeing
and in
very
Lyon.
small groups at our correspondents at the scenes, not really representative of the of the wider movement.
And I would say even this, perhaps the camera angle is quite tight here, so it makes it look like a more dramatic scene than it might actually have been. But certainly what we see here as well is a degree on both sides to spin the success or lack thereof of today's protests, depending on your political position. You can see here one person very much in favour of the protest saying huge success, as many people in the streets as we saw for the El Khomri law. They were the reforms during François Hollande's presidency that had to be forced through the parliament because they didn't get a majority vote. Macron can tremble. Let's keep going. So we'll see what happens. Now, elsewhere, in terms of if you're looking at how people are responding to the hashtag Macron, etc. on social media, it is, of course, the fact that he is in Saint-Martin. And you can see here some of the media coverage of that, relaying what the president has been saying. We're going to act quickly, we're going to act well, and Saint-Martin will be reborn. You can see the president donning there some of the equipment that people involved in the rescue efforts are wearing. And, of course, then on social media, people spinning that as you will, calling him Super Macron, putting on another costume, the saviour. There was
For a photo op.
There was stuff that I didn't show as well, showing him as Super Macron, as in with a blend of him with Superman giving the middle finger. So stuff like that that's a little bit vulgar that I said maybe I shouldn't show on television.
No. Kids could be watching.
Right, and on his own Twitter account, you have he is relaying speeches that he's been giving on arrival in Saint-Martin. So very much an effort to get the message out there that the rescue effort is going well. And this particular quote, it is time for unity, let's be dignified. There are heroes in Saint-Martin, and it's time now for action and reconstruction, of course, for the last number of days. As this fact-checking blog in Le Monde shows, there has been a lot of criticism by the opposition, people saying that there's been pillaging and looting and whatnot, but the effort now appears to have a more positive, unified effort. Photos such as this, very, very much doing the rounds of social media as well, showing one a member of the armed forces with a child in Saint-Martin.
A photo taken by one of our colleagues at France Info. Many thanks, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.